Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, distinguished guests, participants, and fraternity members joining us from across the globe. Welcome to yet another engaging panel discussion by the Institute of Company Secretaries of India on sustainable leadership for effective corporate governance, a webinar specially curated to understand from industry experts what attributes make leaders sustainable for driving effective corporate governance outcomes. I am C.S. Sonu Nahata, the moderator of the session, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce an extremely versatile and experienced panel of learned professionals to you all today. But before, let me also welcome C.S. Ashish Garg, former president and chairman of the International Affairs Committee of the ICSI. And now, moving on to our esteemed guests, we have Mr. Vishwas Khanna and Ms. Bhavna Jalan from the United Kingdom, Mr. Ajay Surana and Mr. Nitish Chandan from Singapore. I'm very pleased to inform you all that all four of them are qualified company secretaries from India and now working in different jurisdictions. So very brief introduction of each one of them, starting with our first panelist, Mr. Vishwas Khanna. He's based in London and is a partner at Advantage Reply, responsible for Advantage's UK financial service, risk and regulatory advisory business, including initiatives towards climate change. Vishwas has deep international financial service consulting and risk management experience across Europe, US, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. He has had complex risk transformations and change programs as a trusted advisor to the C-suite and senior management at banks and other financial firms. He offers objective, independent advice to clients to influence strategic decision-making. He has strong working relationships with financial service firms, industry associations, and academia, and is a speaker at industry events and forums. Currently, Vishwas co-chairs the UK Finance CRO Network Forum and is a member of the Institute of Directors and a non-executive advisor at Mirison. Welcome, Vishwas. Our second panelist, Ms. Bhavna Jalan, is a company secretary as well as a national rank holder chartered accountant from India. She has more than 25 years of professional experience and has led teams in Big Four accounting firms and financial services across multiple jurisdictions, including UK, EMEA, and India. Bhavna started her professional career with PwC Delhi and over the years has worked in various leadership roles across audit and advisory, risk management, corporate governance, and CFO teams. She has experience in mergers and acquisitions and divestitures transactions and has designed and led projects on post-acquisition accounting and integration of business units and companies. Currently, she's working as vice president with Genpact in London with a specialization in the finance and accounting service line, wherein she helps large corporates design their process solutions, develop finance applications, and advise them in the transformation and restructuring of their organizations. Welcome, Bhavna. Our third panelist, Mr. Ajay Surana, is from Singapore. He manages iAccelerate, a strategy and governance consulting firm assisting technology-centric businesses to scale. He's worked with leading financial technology firms in the Asia-Pacific to manage their financial risk management practices and product management teams. He conducts public and in-house workshops on risk management and innovation in financial services. And finally, our fourth panelist, C.S. Nitish Chandan, who is also based out of Singapore. He's a member of the ICSI and chairman of the ICSI Overseas Centre, Singapore. He's the CEO of ECRAPTE Limited, providing corporate services to a number of Y Combinator, Better Capital, and other venture capital investee companies alongside a number of other local SMEs. He's also secretary of the World Energy Council Singapore chapter. A very warm welcome to all our esteemed guests today. Just to inform you all that we will take live questions if time permits, so keep them coming in. Now, without much ado, I would request C.S. Ashish Garg for his quick welcome address for all of us.
Thank you, Sonu. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. my dear colleagues joining from UK and Singapore, all our vast list of members who are attending this webinar across the globe, and so many aspirants who are looking forward the opportunities in the overseas countries. So first of all, I welcome all of you, Bhavna ji and Vishwas ji, to whom we met during our UK visit and physical opening of UK Center of ICSI. And then I saw, and my belief has reaffirmed that our members can do wonders at every part of the world. And examples are in front of us today. There only we have planned that we will showcase our members to the entire world, that if these members can do, yes, you can also do that. Our other panelists also, who are the company secretaries, Mr. Ajay Surana and Mr. Nitesh Chandan from Singapore, one of our other from another overseas center, Singapore. A warm and hearty welcome to this webinar once again. Friends, when we have asked the questions that what we will do with these overseas centers and how this will support to the members who are looking forward to the opportunities across the world. So we are having 5 overseas centers now: Dubai, US, UK, Australia, and Singapore. And Canada is on the way as 6th one. The biggest achievement of this council in the last 4 years. After COVID, when borders are open to travel, one of the delegations presently is attending ICGN conference at Seoul, South Korea, and another one under the leadership of President is attending at Johannesburg, South Africa. And just I want to share that where the panel discussion in the South Africa is organized by Chartered Governance Institute of South Africa. And the topic was global perspective of governance. And in one of the survey, there was a survey that which country is having a best corporate governance. And can you believe 79.2% of people have voted for India. That shows the strength of corporate governance framework in India. And now India is invited, first time I believe, to the Vietnam in roundtable conference of OECD, where we will discuss the changes in the OECD principles. So the way which we are going ahead, it's really amazing. And even to this webinar, before our panelists will speak about the topic, I'll also request them to quickly talk about their journey from Indian CS to overseas governance professional, rather working as a company law secretary to the governance professional of that country, or the filing and filling of form to just talking about the risk management and so on and so forth. So our members in India who are looking forward the opportunities and travel to US, UK, Singapore, and other part of the world, they will motivate and they will come to know how our members can establish their work in that part of the country. Now coming to the topic, I'll not take much of the time, but sustainability and governance have become the buzzword and are quickly rising to the top of corporate agendas today. Presently, we are talking about BRSR in our country. It is applicable to top 100 countries. The Corporate Governance Award, which is the pioneer, and India is doing it, or your institute is doing it since last 20-21 years. We have included so many awards in that category, and BRSR is the new category which we have added from this year itself. It shows the importance of sustainability and governance in the corporate world. And partly because of the growing evidence that sustainable practice result in improved financial performance, and partly due to pressure from investors, employees, and the public for companies to articulate the role they play in addressing societal changes. Though we know that it's a daunting task to tread a steady and sustainable growth path in this world of increasingly unpredictable and complex risk. But business leaders are fast recognizing that companies can be successful in the long run if they are able to successfully balance their natural, social, and financial capitals. Steering their organizations from leadership and sustainability is for sure a challenge. But I think that's where the company secretaries and the governance professionals have a role to play. As an advisor to the board or the bridge between the stakeholders, we can influence it to adopt mechanisms that mitigate the potential risk and drive development while protecting the interest to all stakeholders. With the COVID pandemic, This new perspective on corporate governance by making the stakeholders more vigilant and participating gained a lot more momentum. Organizations understood that impact it could have on their business and have started adjusting their existing organizational ecosystem to incorporate the non-financial metrics of reporting into business mandate. As governance professionals, we company secretaries have to address that shift of perspective. In fact, we are the ones helping organizations formulate policies that emphasize incorporating participatory governance in organizational strategy to manage the risk and compliance associated with it. The past decades have seen so many changes. Organizations are making conscious efforts in corporate disclosures. Governments around the world have also started emphasizing responsiveness towards the need of those they are governing. All this change behavior is attributed to the significant improvement in governance across the globe. We have seen so many show cause notices in India when MC and SEBI are just putting everyone on the toes that how important is the governance and how important is the compliance in this country now. So good governance is not just about staying compliant, but is also delivered when organizations develop the start understanding of their purpose and framework that defines them. I am glad that ICSI is constantly helping us, company secretaries, enhance our knowledge base and competency to gain competitive edge. We have been able to diversify our work environment today. We are working in cyber and strategic risk management, regulatory and legal support, mergers and acquisitions, accounting, internal controls, and now arbitration and mediation as well. Actually, the sky is the limit. So today, sustainable leadership augmented with innovation technology is imperative for imbuing the good governance culture down the line for the growth and development of business the world over. A trusted business advisor, it is moral responsibility to help business leaders, the business with environmental and social concern. And it is such a pleasure to have an esteemed panel of professionals from different jurisdictions, and very much pleasure that all our company secretaries who are integrating them business strategies into their organizations come and discuss how sustainable leadership is important for effective corporate governance. So really a pleasure to have you all once again across the globe, and looking forward to such a interactive discussion during this webinar. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much, sir, for setting the tone of the panel discussion. You've so perfectly blended in the Indian perspective, how things are happening in India, and we're so much eager to hear how it happens in the UK and Singapore. So actually, gone is the belief that businesses must choose between doing good and doing well, especially after the pandemic, as rightly pointed out by yourself, that there's a strong realization that in order to create long-term value, organizations will have to effectively engage on sustainability issues. They have to identify their unique differentiators or area of comparative advantage and then leverage them to maximize social and financial value. And how will they do it? Of course, it is the leadership and the management that has to embed these in the organizational strategy and ensure that it is followed down the line in true letter and spirit. So without me doing much of the talking, I would now invite our esteemed panelists to very briefly give their initial thoughts or opening remarks on this topic of the day before we initiate the actual panel discussion. And yes, we would also be very glad to hear how your journey has been from India to Singapore to UK. So we'd start with Vishwas first.
No, thank you so much. Thank you, Ashish, for the opening remarks. Very, very well said, some of the statements that you made, and I've noted them and I'll probably come to them again during the introduction. So while I qualified as a CS back in 2006, I believe, never really practiced as a CS, but the fundamentals that you gain from this process of one, technical learning, and secondly, engaging with your stakeholders, engaging with fellow participants is what I think gives you the drive to make a meaningful difference in how you move forward in your life. I started post my CS qualification. I also did my MBA, and I started as a risk consultant in Morgan Stanley, moved to Deloitte in proper consulting, and then moved to Avantage to run the business in the UK for corporate governance, risk management solutions, and so on. And from a CS perspective, what's always stood out is the attention to detail, the attention to the technical matter at hand, because even though the broader construct of the story in terms of corporate governance moves from the more specific to more general, so compliance-based, law-based attitudes to a softer guidance-based compliance, if I may say so, the fundamentals of the CS qualification really matter. And I would encourage everybody who's going through the process of going through the CS. I know the subjects are difficult. It's too much. There's so much to learn. There's so much to read through. It seems difficult. It seems sometimes irrelevant, but it's all very relevant to what we do ultimately end up doing in our lives. And there are stages in our careers when we always reflect back and say, this is what I studied. This is what I read about. And it is relevant in this context. I can think about it in that way. So it's an excellent course and a really, really interesting course to study. In terms of talking about corporate governance, and we'll come to sustainable leadership and how it applies to corporate governance. I'm a keen student of history, and I think going back to some historical context, where corporate governance comes from is important to understand where it is going now. If you think about the historical context of why firms need to be governed, there are two strands that have led to the development of our existing corporate governance frameworks. The first is the way governments are organized. Governments in a democratic environment are based around the separation of the three branches of government: the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. And within that structure, if you look at how our parliamentary democracies are structured, you have the executive within the legislative branch, which is the lower house of the parliament, which enacts the laws, and the upper house of the parliament, which looks at reviewing those laws and providing independent guidance. And that's the structure of the executives and the non-executives then that flows down into how organizations are built now. Every organization has a board, a leadership center, which directs what the organization does. And within the board, you have the executive, something similar to the lower house of parliament, and the non-executive, something similar to the upper house of parliament. And so that's one strand that's led to the development of our modern board structure, if I may say so. The other strand is what you call the command and control system of how militaries operate. Militaries, war organizations have been in existence for before even formal governance came into place. And a lot of our organizational structures are built to mimic what militaries did 3,000 years back, 4,000 years back. So the command and control structure, which is the senior leadership sets the tone for the organization, the junior elements of the organization follow those structures and go to war effectively. That's exactly how modern corporate organizations are built. So if you ever think about the history of why organizations are structured in this particular way, why corporate governance exists in a certain way, there are two strands to go back to: government and military. And that's exactly what, influences everything that we do since then. And when you talk about corporate governance more specifically, or how organizations are led from the top, you will start noticing that there are, I would say, 3 or 4 broad strands of how that thought process has evolved over the last couple of centuries. The first element is, of course, the formation of a joint stock company. The first examples start coming in Netherlands, UK, some bits in the US 100 years later, and so on. But there's a historical context to it. And when the first companies are created, the need to manage those companies becomes apparent. And you start saying, what rules, laws do we need to set in place so that these companies which are taking public money or raising even private funds are well governed? So you start seeing a strand which says, we need to have more laws. We need to have more specific checklists of how an organization should be led and run over a period of time. That's one strand, which is the legal basis for why corporate governance is important. But as markets mature, as capitalism starts coming in, there's an increased focus on not only the legal aspect of running a board, an entity, running through corporate governance, but an element of guidance, an element of soft skills starts coming into play, which is to say, a board does not only need to follow the law of the listing, but it also needs to start following the good practice, the guidance that we are giving to them. So a lot of what happens from a corporate governance perspective, particularly in mature markets, is not from purely a legalistic basis, which is to say, these are the 10 things a board must be doing, but also from a voluntary guidance-based perspective, which is to say, for example, the OECD principles or the Basel principles for financial services institutions, which talk about what governance models should be implemented, not as a compulsion, but as a good standard. And the third strand there is, you've gone through the law standard, you've gone through the guidance standard. And the third one is a voluntary standard, where firms say, we are following all laws, we are following all good practice and guidance, but we want to do better. We want to establish our own rules, our own targets, which is where a lot of drive towards diversity, a drive towards ESG, for example, starts to come in. So when you, again, analyze corporate governance from how it's grown over a period of time, it's always helpful to see that it goes from the specific to the more general, the law-based, legal-based to the more voluntary. And that's the nature of, I think, all corporate governance now, again, particularly in mature markets. In that context, when you look at the journey the UK has been, and I don't know, somebody needs to stop me at some stage because I can go on for some time. I'll probably take one more minute. If you look at the journey the UK has been on when it comes to corporate governance, the broader strand was similar. First, listing rules apply to corporates, which need to follow those rules in terms of how their organization is set up, how boards are structured. And then after every single crisis the world has gone through, new requirements, new legislations or new standards started to get set up. So the first one was back in the 90s, the Higgs Commission, which said, certain corporate governance standards need to be enhanced. The seminal change came post 2008, when in the financial crisis, everybody felt that firms were not being governed to the right level. And also the laws that we had established for firms to be governed were ineffective. At that point in the UK, we had the Walker Commission, and the Walker Commission laid out, I would say, 25 principles on how organizations should be structured and how they should be run on an ongoing basis. And within those principles, some of the new things started coming in, which is an emphasis on soft skills, an emphasis on diversity, and an emphasis on a social responsibility outside, as Sonu, you said, the responsibility of just doing well. That if I do financially well, I'm fine. No, there's a lot more you need to do. And post the Walker Commission, in the last couple of years, there's been an intense amount of focus on not only, again, legalistic requirements, voluntary standards, but also what you call an outcome-focused judgment, if I may say so. What it means is we are not only going to judge organizations and their corporate governance based on pure compliance, pure voluntary standards, but does this corporate governance lead to proper outcomes? You might have the best will in the world, but your corporate governance does not lead to good outcomes. So we need to start measuring you against tangible outcomes. That's where, Ashish, the point that you mentioned about disclosures becoming more important. That's where you start saying we are doing the right things, they lead to the right outcomes, and we'll report on those outcomes as well. And over a period of time, because we are going to report on those requirements, the general public, our common stakeholders can make an assessment of are we doing the right things from a corporate governance perspective, from an outcomes perspective. And that is the journey that UK has followed, to a certain extent Singapore has followed, a certain extent the US has followed. I think to go back to that journey, that is what I expect India will also follow in due course. They're already, as Ashish said, India is seen as, I think, a hallmark for corporate governance standards, but the journey of coming to an outcome-focused paradigm, as well as a paradigm which relies on a lot more disclosure, I think that will come to the Indian market very quickly. And as corporate secretaries, company secretaries, I think everybody on this conversation is quite well placed to respond to that change as and when it comes. I'll stop there. Of course, I'll take any questions as they come through, but I'll invite other members to give their views as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. First of all, for letting our audience know that company secretaryship, the course, the process has been so important for you throughout this journey. I'm sure the rest of the panelists would also agree on the same. You're placed, very well placed in different organizations, but the process has been very engaging, and that has helped you reach where you are today. And also, I think it's really important to understand the roots, the base. So the way you have mentioned, have shown us that how it has transitioned from where it was earlier to today, the three standards, the law standard, then the guidance standard, and the voluntary standard, and the way the transparency and accountability has been induced today. And yes, we do stand as looked upon as a company that has mandated corporate governance, but yes, it's a long path to tread. So thank you so much for that address, Vishwas. I would now request Bhavna to give her opening remarks. And of course, you also need to mention how you have gone to the UK and how the journey has been so far.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sonu. Thank you for your generous introduction, which was very kind of you. And thanks, Ashish and Vishwas, for setting up the scene for corporate governance generally, as well as in UK. So as you said, I'm a qualified company secretary and a chartered accountant. But similar to Vishwas, I'm not a practicing company secretary, to be honest. So, but I do appreciate my qualification a lot, and it has helped me in my career very much, actually. I'll give you an example. I was appointed as the head of finance for a startup, to set up that company in India. It was a UK company, and I was working in India, and I was appointed to set up that company in India. So my role was mainly to start with finance management and everything. But at the same time, my secretarial knowledge, my understanding of laws and legal framework within India, as well as, just my mindset to read the laws in a way we were taught during our examination of company secretary, that really helped me to not just, be the head of finance, but I was part of the board, managing after their secretarial activities, as well as, signing up on the legal agreements, going through the legal agreements, setting those up. So that perspective really helps you. So, even if you are not using your degree, in your profession, but just the perspective of reading those laws and understanding really helped in my career. Not just there. So when I moved to London, I came here like 12 years back. And since then, I've been working in corporate world in the CFO teams for last 10, 12 years now. And recently, I've just moved to Genpact, but before that, I was part of the reporting team of financial services. And one of the biggest, objective or task for us used to be the board reporting, the information which we are sending to the board. And again, I'll come to the point on why that's important. That was actually the crux for the, effective corporate governance, where the board would ask you for information, so that they can take informed decisions. And the secretarial knowledge or, the perspective again helped me to present them such information which I thought would be useful for them to take an informed decision on the risk management of the company, not just provide them numbers, because that's available publicly. They can look through financial statements, they can search, Google, everywhere they'll find those. But giving them numbers which would help them take informed decisions on where the company is trading towards risk, how it needs to be managed. Things which has come up post-COVID is, concentration risk, whether we are concentrated on one customer, one market, one area, so one vendor. So those kind of information was very important for us to provide. And that perspective came from, the risk governance kind of a, mindset, which we all are when we are, reading about corporate governance or the secretarial practice course. So that's been brief of my journey. Happy to, answer any questions if people want to know anything else. But it's been fantastic here. It's been lovely to be in London, looking after different markets, as Vishwas said. And agree, it's a different world, but it's interesting. It's obviously a growth, it's a developed country. So you've got a lot of opportunities and lots to learn, as well as gift from, and as Ashish was saying, India is obviously one of the shining stars these days. So that mix and merger of our experience between India and UK has really helped us, at least me, to grow and, look at different perspective. Corporate governance, again, coming to that point for me is, as Vishwas has really set the scene, that the board is becoming effective. But to me also, just adding on to it, is also the management, the segregation of duty between management and the board has become very, very important. The management should be responsible for the risks and the running of the business, and the board should have a big oversight on that, which has become a big agenda for the board meetings now. That's where the board of directors should be concentrating on and looking, making sure that the risks which the company is undertaking is effective and is going to not lead to any, business continuity issues in later stages. So business continuity planning has also become a big factor for a corporate governance, agenda for board meetings. Again, sustainable leadership is really important, that sets the scene, as we've all said, not just adding to the shareholders' value, but also to the societal challenges which we are now seeing, again, COVID and Ukraine and Russia crisis. We've all seen that how it is important, simple thing, as all of us would agree, and which is a big news, is the energy crisis. So how all of these things are important for our business planning, continuity planning. So, I think it's like people have set the scene. So corporate governance is quite, important for all of us, and not just, I would say, more than just as a thought process. It's the execution stage also, which is very, very important, where board sets the, the culture of the, the board meetings and the organization, the leadership, where sustainability is put on the top of the agenda for the board. The strategies are made in such a way that, the risk the company is undertaking is on top priority, and the board kind of, has an oversight of it. Simple thing, the board compensation, and the management compensation should be driven by these agenda in mind, so that there is no malpractices around it. So that's how the, the governance structure is evolving over time, and which is across the globe we are seeing, and pretty much similar in UK as well as in India. Thank you so much.
Right. I really like the way, it has gone so far. So Vishwas has given us like the base, the root of corporate governance. Bhavna has now moved on to the boards. And one thing you very rightly mentioned, Bhavna, that it's not really important to use the degree, but the course that we have, the way we interpret the statutes, the understanding of the laws, I think that's very important. And that's what each one of us, even the members here in India, when we say that we are not being able to use our degree, that's not really important. The course that we have gone through, the learnings, they are important. And I think that's what would help us achieve maybe close to whatever you all have achieved today.
I think, and I completely agree with you on that, because, again, apologies, but I have not used my degree at all. Like, I've never been, unless for a short period of time when I was as a company secretary of the startup. But again, repeating, this degree has not just only helped me in my consulting days, with Big Four, when I was like almost 10 years of my career. And now again, I'm back into consulting. So given me that perspective to look at the company as a wholesome and not just looking at numbers itself, as well as when I was in corporate, as I said, reaching out to the board of directors and ensuring, understanding, giving a perspective to the questions which they ask, not just providing them, okay, this is a financial number, please take it, but giving them a perspective around that number and how that can relate to their planning, as well as how the management is kind of looking at that number and what are their thoughts. That really helps you, and looking at the legal framework around. We may not be qualified lawyers, but this degree really helps us to look at various legal aspects of, of contracts. Yeah,
I'm sure it does. And the way you said that, to be able to identify the unique differentiator, the area, and compare it, which of your comparative advantage, and then leverage on that. I think that's where the degree helps you. So thank you so much for that initial opening remark. I would now request Mr. Surana, Ajay Surana, to kindly share his thoughts on the topic and your journey, of course, so far.
Thank you, and thanks Thanks, Vishwas. Thanks, Bhavna. I think I'll be beating the record again. Again, I want to start with saying that it's not necessary that you don't have to do practicing company secretary to move overseas and be successful. So I'm the third one in the row who graduated and finished my company secretary in 1999. And I never practiced it even for a single day. Sunil knows a bit more about the facts that I can't even practice now because I never finished my 15 days of course because I just moved out. But the long story short, which I wanted to say to the students, if there are any, when I did my CS in 1999, I came from a physics honors background, straight jumped to it. I had no idea of accounting rules and anything, no idea of law, but I thoroughly enjoyed every moment of my studies, doing the classes at the institute. There used to be an old building in Calcutta at Russell Street, which I don't know whether it's still there or not. I used to go and take my classes there. And I think I did reasonably well in respect to my exams also, simply because I really enjoyed what I was learning. I think I can still remember majority of companies' laws and sections and cases because I spent a lot of time meeting with the practicing company secretaries at that point of time, because probably I was the only one as a student who will volunteer and go to these forums and break their heads. So it was really a nice learning experience for me. Coming to from a profession perspective, just to finish that off, I moved to Singapore around 17 years back. I had a pivot in my career after 2 years working in a manufacturing company. I wanted to get into financial risk management. Another common thing which I see between Vishwas and Bhavna and myself, pretty much into financial risk management, hard code modeling, credit risk, market risk, interest rate, liquidity risk, operational risk, and got into that field, and I did reasonably well. And at the end, I had my own company doing the same thing, and I sold that business a couple of years back. But the interesting thing which was there, that the grounding, right, to understand a business more holistically probably was shaped there. So the simple message which I would like to put out here is that, like, we used to always see from a profession of chartered accountant that they can pretty much go and spread their wings in any side, and I think that pretty much applies to company secretary also, if there is a wish to repivot, and the learnings are really very powerful. Now coming to the topic fairly quickly, because I have not worked at all, but I have worked with almost 100 over banks, helping them put their risk management projects, policies, risk appetite, the governance frameworks. Even I've talked about models which they do, the model risk management, the model risk governance. And the governance is always pretty much the same thing, right? It's defining your objectives, making the framework, making the policies, how do you measure, how do you manage by exception. And that goes with any policy, right? From a corporate governance perspective, obviously from a transparency, it is no more a topic of, transparency and reporting. And Vishwas made a very interesting points with respect to two threads which he thought. I'll possibly try to just attempt and say there's another angle which I would like to see here is that majority of the corporate governance came because of the Companies Act, right? Initially, it started with that, right? That was the pivot. And Companies Act obviously comes from UK. Singapore, whether it's Singapore or any other Commonwealth countries, they adopted, and now only we have broken from the shackles and say that fine, we'll amend it, and we have made major amendments because those are no more relevant to us. And it's also because of the way the businesses were coming up, right? The whole corporate governance comes from a framework that the investors, they are people who have put money and they would like to have transparency in the governance, whether they are doing the big things properly or not, and was mostly for listed companies and companies which are large, right? Now corporate governance is 10 times more potent and important for startups. And you have read the news of Byju's not reporting. You have read about another payment companies in India having a problem. You can talk about another very successful Indian women in Singapore who have been fired from our board, right? So obviously because they have started taking money from from people, and they are small, they are startups, there are no regulations which are applicable to them with respect to listing regulations, but they are far more important to have a proper governance framework. So I think that's emerging, that corporate governance is. The another thing which I wanted to add to Vishwas is that while I'm not sure about what percolation of corporate governance will happen from Singapore, UK to India, but I'm very sure it will happen from India to rest of the world. Because India is a place where family businesses were there. Singapore is a place where family businesses are there, right? So even if I talk about an independent non-executive director in a family business, his job pretty much is to take care of the fights between the two shareholders, right? So it's a very different role. And so what is required from corporate governance in our part of the world, where there's a very different approach to people, to life, to society, to relationship, it's something which is coming up, right? And who can teach sustainability and governance to Marwadis, to a place I belong to, right? They have been always frugal and sustainable. All our businesses 20 years, 30 years back were sustainable. We stopped being sustainable, and that's why we are talking about sustainability again, right? So I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned, and there's a lot of torchlight which Indian governance experts who actually see things better will shed. I'll give a very interesting example before I close. When I fall sick in Singapore, I don't like the doctors here, and I can very, very clearly say same for Bhavna and Vishwas. It's a very difficult process to get an appointment, 100 checkups done, and then finally you get diagnosed after 5 months. You don't know when, right? And then your medication will start. Once it's done, obviously they'll give you the best medication, and it's all good. But India, I go to a doctor on the day one, he will pretty much diagnose what it is. He'll do a hit and trial with me, and he'll get me my medicine and fix me faster. So if I fall sick, I actually go to India. Even when I know there are more established and expert doctors sitting in Singapore, the medical tourism comes to Singapore. It's just because we see more cases. They see more cases. So the kind of variety which Indian professionals see is unprecedented. And I think they are the one who will be the torch bearers, and next time we'll be listening to you.
Oh, what a wonderful example of the doctors. Well, I've spent 2 years in the UK, and I would agree to whatever you said. Whenever I used to fall sick, it was only the Indian doctor that I would go to. I mean, not really. It was a phone call to my doctor back in India to understand what is happening, and he would give me some medicines which were again not available without prescription. So it was a bad process, and I used to miss going to my doctors, to my GP. So, and yes, we are no longer in Russell Street, Ajay. We've moved to Beg Bagan in Calcutta. So that's where the new building is now. A very, very interesting journey. You've shared that from a science background, you've moved to CS, and then from CS, you're not really working as a company secretary, and you've moved to finance. So look at the journey. If the students who are listening, even the young members who are here, so it's an interesting journey that if we see over here for all our panelists we've heard so far, that they're not really doing or practicing company secretaryship or CS, but they're still in the governance profession, and that the course has helped them shape and look at things from a broader perspective. Even if they're looking at just the finances or doing financial consulting, it is this broad overview. And your work with little work that you've done in the subcontinent in India, that has helped you gain so much of experience to be able to share that with companies in UK. So glad that you shared such wonderful insights. I will now move on to Nitish. Your opening remarks, and you're also the chairman of our Singapore Overseas Center. So your journey would also all the more be a little more interesting. Please, sir.
So for me, I am, as you can see, a true blood company secretary. I have been company secretary all my life, till the level that I did my foundation. I didn't even do graduation. I just did company secretaryship. So only degree that I hold is company secretaryship. I have not studied anything else. I have not worked as anything else. Same as Ajay, I was also from science background. I did my +2 in science. And then I did foundation. I got ranked in the inter-board group and all those things. So basically, company secretary all the way. I moved to Singapore. I had a short stint as a practicing secretary for 1 or 2 years in India. Then I moved to Singapore for some personal reasons. And then Before I continue with my journey, I would like to tell all the people who are listening here that Indian company secretaries are way more qualified, way more knowledgeable than company secretary anywhere else. I went for my interview. It was a consultancy. So I was asked 2 questions. And I answered later the person became my colleague. So I asked him also, why did you just ask me 2 questions in the interview? He told me, okay, you were way better what we're expecting you to be. So definitely, I won't comment about any other aspect, but as a pure secretarial perspective, company secretaries of India are way better than any other company secretary, or at least as good as any other company secretarial body overseas. So yeah, coming back to my journey, I moved to Singapore in 2010, and 2013 I started my own practice with a local partner. And then a couple of years ago, we set up Singapore chapter, I think 1.5 years almost. Because of COVID, we didn't have a formal opening, but yeah, we do expect to see maybe chairman or other dignitaries to come down. So yeah, so in my professional career as a company secretary, I have seen at least 4,000 to 5,000 startup or different companies, because it's been a consultancy all the way. So it used to be a big company. We used to have a large team of 15, 16 company secretaries working on thousands of companies. I have also been associated with large corporates. I was a part of the deal that made India's first unicorn way back in 2011. It was so I was a part of the filings and deal and documentation for first unicorn. I have been also been company secretary of one of the largest telcos in India. Started in 2012-13, so I know which company it is, you know. Yeah, so headquarters in Singapore. So basically, although I am based in Singapore, I am very closely linked to what's going in India, because the holding company is in Singapore. And in that way, I bring a different perspective to the panel, I would say. Coming back to the topic, what happens is that, as everybody said, value creation is not the sole role of the companies. You have to do it without harming the society. So as Sonaji said in my introduction, I also work as the Secretary of World Energy Council Singapore. So from that angle, I understand sustainability more, a little bit more how the board comes, how the energy leaders are thinking, what they're thinking, what they're planning. So in my role as the Secretary of the World Energy Council, I liaise regularly with all the large power gencos, generation companies and distributed companies in Singapore, and also Southeast Asia, and also on a global level. Regular meetings, we have monthly meetings, and we have to put what our chapter is doing. So the main aim now of business is not only to generate business, to generate income, to create value, but also to do it without harming the society. To put in simple words, the role of board has changed just from strategic decision making to creating the ethics, the ethical, the societal role, the ethical role, as well as guiding for value to the society, not only to the company, not only to the stakeholders. So, and also if we see the compliances, the governance, it is moving from, as everybody mentioned, from checklist compliance to providing, creating a transparent, a flexible, a clear communication with the stakeholders. So that's where I believe everybody believes we're heading to. So in the interest of time, I'll keep it short, and we can discuss further during the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Interesting. Well, like just the way I said, because you are the only practicing company secretary, the one who's just done company secretaryship all throughout, it would be a wonderful flavor to the entire discussion. I mean, of course, everyone's a company secretary. However, 3 of them are working in finances and financially consulting, and there's one who's purely working as a company secretary. Thank you for sharing your initial remarks. Without talking much, I think I'll straight away move to the questions. I would just remind the audience once again that we would be accepting questions from the audience towards the end. So you can keep them coming in. And yeah, we'll head straight away to the first question. That would be for Ms. Jalan. And we've heard the base, the roots from Vishwas, but I would still want you to define good governance in your words. And then, did the pandemic bring in any new dimension to governance and risk management in organizations across UK? That would be my first question.
Yeah, I think as everybody set the scene, corporate governance is very, very important for any company to run, or for, like as Vishwas said, not just the company, for any country or any organization to run, basically. But yeah, the main concepts or the importance or, for good governance is the board leadership. That has to be like very, very firm, right? The board should be able to identify difference between the management and the board, their leadership roles. So the management should be able to have the risk and the opportunities defined, and the board should be able to monitor that in their board meetings, bring that up as the most, important agenda of the board meetings. The purpose of, every board meeting should be driven around sustainable lenses, right? That's how the board should be looking at things. The strategy, risk alignment, the risk framework should be very well defined for any corporate for them to continue. The structures, and it's more like, the people and the composition, the agenda. The target should be that the board should look at everything with a sustainable lens now, as well as the management. They should be held accountable for any risks which the company is undertaking. Post-pandemic, couple of things have really come out bright and sharp. One is the concentration risk. Earlier, as part of a risk management strategy, it was there, but, the companies were not really paying attention to if they have a single market or a single customer, a single vendor, how the employees are doing. So now that has become, at least in UK, and I would assume Vishwas may agree with it, at least in UK, and probably I would say across the globe, the concentration risk has become a big agenda now in any board meetings or in any risk management framework. Like, we have diversified our risk across markets or across products, and we've made that in the execution stage, we've made that as part of the, the business continuity planning. Again, coming from my experience, as I said, I'm more into finance side. So when we do this business continuity planning, we make sure that we have a diverse, plan, or there are various stages in our plan which helps us meet various risks which come up in future, like any emerging risk which we have in future. That's kind of assumed and taken care of in our business continuity planning. There are some research which says that before pandemic, only 21% of the board was kind of ready to take any emerging or non-existing risk, which probably now the agenda has changed, the targets have changed, and board is now kind of making sure that these are, incorporated in their meetings and in their agenda. So that's how I think the culture and the framework is changing now, and the concentration of the board is changing towards more of sustainable leadership. As we all agree, it's not just about shareholders' value, but it's a wider stakeholder value which needs to be now looked after, including your vendor, your employees, which is, we've all seen it during COVID, how important it is to look after your employees, your customers, the society at large, which is now the main agenda which the board is looking after. Now, and we can keep discussing this topic, it's so wide and it's so favorite for everybody now that it can go on. And, the pressure it has created on all of us, especially during all this last 2 years of crisis, one after the other, which we are all seeing. So, yeah, risk has become a very big, factor for board meetings. And I, again, personally, from my experience, being a consultant, I was part of the risk management consulting teams of Big Four. And, we've set up risk frameworks. We've set up SOX compliance framework for all these, in my past, I've set up for the companies, and I now can see how important it is now. Earlier in those days, like 10 years back, 15 years back, it was just an agenda. It was just a tick the box exercise that we have to have a risk and control framework. But how important it has become now is what you see, it is an essential part of any company's setup, and any corporate sustainable, leadership should be looking after it.
Needless to say, because of what we've gone through in the last 2 years, of course, it has to be a prime agenda in the strategies at the meetings. Vishwas, you wanted to add something to this?
Yes, I completely agree with Bhavna. I think we have lots of parallel experiences in this over the last couple of years. I wanted to highlight two additional things when it comes to how boards have reacted to what happened with the pandemic. firstly, I think there was a pivot in focus from following a script to being in a situation where there was no script. So when the pandemic hit and when boards had to react, you had to start looking at forming meetings on a daily basis. How do I react to a situation now? There's a lockdown in the UK. In 2 weeks' time, there's a lockdown in India. How do I react to this situation? So there is no script to follow. So what you need to start thinking about is not compliance or risk management in a traditional way, but about thinking about how you make your running of your organization resilient to external shocks. And when I say resilient, it means resilience from any aspect, not just a pandemic, not just a disruption from that, but the Ukraine crisis, for example, that has caused a lot of disturbance in the Western markets, obviously, and globally, but Western markets particularly. How do you work in an operational resilient way under these circumstances? I'll give you an example on that one. Over the last 2 days, what we were doing with one of our clients, a Japanese bank with a UK operation, is to simulate a situation where a crisis hits again in a sharp shock scenario, 2 days where the external shock hits. How would the board convene? How would the board discuss the matters? How would they take actions in that situation? Mindful that not all board members will be available in the first instance to be brought to a board meeting to make decisions. How do you do that? So we went through a simulation exercise. 9 o'clock in the morning, comms sent out. There is a crisis. This event has happened. The board needs to convene in the next 1 hour. And the board is spread across the globe. Some of them are sitting in Japan. Some of them are traveling to Basel. Some of them are in the US. How do you get them all together? In 1 hour, we had 18 of the 24 members required to be present. Everybody knew it was a drill, it was a scenario, it was a simulation, but people were available to join in. Technology helped and all that stuff. And then in that 1 hour after that, we said, this is the scenario, how do we react to it? And so everybody starts thinking about, from a financial perspective, how do we react to this? Do we need to call the regulator that the scenario has hit us and we are going to be affected by this? So what you see here is, in post the learnings of the pandemic, the boards have become a lot more proactive about thinking about what can happen again that can go wrong, and are we in a position to solve the problem? So that's, I think, the first aspect. A lot of resilience being shown in reacting to the pandemic. And the second one is the realization that organizations are not about even the outcomes they create. It's about the people that sit in organizations. So the value of empathy, the value of listening to people, the value of accommodating people has skyrocketed. The things that happened 3 years back in our organizations where, if people needed something, if people needed family time, if people needed to attend to emergencies, versus now, it's a sea change. And that's not only driven from middle management, but from the top. Boards are asking people, listening attentively and responding to those requirements. And what I expect will happen is, as we are going through the great resignation, at least at the moment, boards which are listening to people, are attuned to people's requirements, are diverse enough to understand. Ajay made a very good point about corporate governance existing not in a silo, but in a societal context, right? Organizations which listen to that societal context are the ones that will potentially succeed. And boards need to start that thinking before it percolates down to the other levels of management. I'll stop there. Hopefully helpful.
Of course.
Adding to Vishwas' point on, the risk management framework or how. So that's similar, because the role which I play is more on a CFO side of things. So, we've started building a lot of simulations and a lot of varieties to our continuity planning as well. Not just looking at, and as Vishwas is rightly pointing out, like various scenarios, putting that in perspective of numbers as well, because that's, again, very important for the companies to achieve, especially in all these unprecedented situations we've all seen in the last 2 years, and we don't know what else to look forward to or what else can come up. So we started putting in a lot of simulations and a lot of varieties to our, continuity planning business plans. And quite importantly, the auditors have become very, very, stringent or important part of it, not just the board, but even the audit committees and the auditors have also started looking at the business continuity planning in a very deep, manner. The board asks us for all kind of scenarios which we can think over and put in all the risk which the company can face in near future, and put in a plan around it. So that's where not just the secretarial side, but your outlook towards numbers and the risk is important to kind of integrate. So that's how these again, if we have students here or people thinking of doing accounting along with secretarial practice, or people who have that knack for numbers, it's important to look into numbers and the risk management at the same time. They all go hand in hand. There's nothing in this corporate world which is one silo. Everything has to be looked at together as a framework.
Absolutely. I think it is the people, planet, and profits all coming in together.
Exactly.
And that's how we are looking to build resilient economic systems.
Exactly.
That's
so
what.
Society as well as your profits, as we are now saying, I said earlier as well, it's not just the shareholders' value, it's the entire stakeholders' value which needs to be looked after by the board. Absolutely. Rather than just the numbers and creating a market cap.
Absolutely. I think we've heard the London perspective. I would also want to know how it is in Singapore. Is it the same in Singapore? Ajay, would you want to share your thoughts there? How the pandemic brought a new dimension to governance risk management in organizations there?
I think definitely Vishwas highlighted the points. But just to add one thing, which I see now, obviously the pandemic is over, technically. But the fact that, yes, we want to prepare for another black swan event and something like that happens is one thing, right? But there are another 364 days which are BAU, right? That has changed, right? That has changed with respect to how do you lead the team? How do you manage? How do you handle people? Do you need to change the policies? There's a lot of changes in the policies which has happened, right? All the policies has undergone a tremendous change with respect to leave, with remote working policies. So obviously there's a lot of shift. The thing is, when the hammer hits hard, these things happened, as very interestingly Vishwas said, with respect to not really waiting for calling something. It's happening now, so you have to do it now. There's everything has to be done on yesterday basis, and that has actually made a lot of changes. Now they are getting regularized, right? Let me take a simple example. It was unheard of, in my word, that a FX trader would be taking a phone in his trading room, right? But now, pandemic time, he was trading from his room, his bedroom. And the laptops and the machineries were sent to his room from the biggest banks of the world, trying to make things secured as much they are possible, right? Even putting a camera there. So that he is able to be monitored while he's trading. So things have changed. So there's a lot of fallout with respect to how do you regularize what has happened, and because that has changed the mindset itself, right? I was talking to somebody in the banks in Singapore. Again, a lot of my experience comes from corporate governance in banks and startups only, so I'll not be able to talk much about the listed companies. But people going back to office for 2 days. That's another difficulty with respect to managing the remote, part hybrid. So a lot of things are changing. There is also change in regulation. The regulators also have learned, so they're also putting new things. So there's a lot of flux happening. I think it's a topic of the day. It'll take some time to settle it down and then rediscuss it. But yes, things are happening just like everywhere else in Singapore. Maybe more because Singapore is more checklist driven ever.
But taking a cue from there, actually, my next question for you would be, do you think achieving perfect governance amidst ever-changing laws in technology is a challenge? Since you are into strategic and governance consulting, let me ask you, there has been a paradigm shift in the way good governance is approached today by organizations in Singapore in this post-pandemic era.
I think that there are multiple reasons. I think even before pandemic, it was evolving, right? So as I said, that it's no more a reporting or a transparency kind of thing, right? Yes, it is still there. You need to tick the box to to have your licenses and to continue operating and not having any fines from the regulators and the compliance authorities. So that part will never go away. But yes, you were already seeing that that more responsiveness with respect to understanding what needs to be done, right? So I had advised a lot of banks not into the corporate governance policy, but obviously their risk management governance policy, which actually goes back to the board itself, so it becomes a sub part of it, right? So I've done that in the past, and I have done with quite a few startups. And I think the question at the end pretty much has come up. It's a very pertinent question: is if you are a stakeholder, what you would like to know, right? What gives you confidence and trust that the business is governed properly and they are well equipped to take care of those changes. So these things would change. Laws and regulations are changing fast now. So, but that was the job of corporate governance anyways, right? In BAU, I don't need very smart people to run the businesses. They were supposed to take care of changing environment. So yes, that has happened. It has got few more elements inside. The cybersecurity, the PDPA, the data protection, right? That has come up big time. The second thing which is happening, again, I said, even pre-COVID times, even the evolution, the startup world, we started looking at democratization of all the services, right? And any service is broken down into the smallest component. That's why whole startup world has boomed. The technology has made that happen. And those questions were being asked already to the established large organizations, right? Because they are supposedly non-transparent, non-democratic, right? So just to give an example, 7 years back, I would never question a bank that I have put 5% savings deposit in your bank. Where are you putting my money in, right? Because it's supposed to be. Now I have a choice. I can have a choice where will my money be used, right? So from that perspective, every service has been democratized, and that needs a lot of transparency. So that evaluation has already happened, and that is obviously there only to survive and to be there. So from that perspective, the governance itself is adopting very, very fast. So those waves are already there. It just pandemic actually made it much, much more faster. I'll stop with a very interesting example, and it's a bit sad example, but it is actually from UK. Going back into your territory, Bhavna and Vishwas, when the pandemic happened, and it is because of a personal experience that if somebody passed away, you need a death certificate to do the cremation, right? It took 12 days to get a death certificate because there was no process. Pandemic had just hit, right? You cannot go to the office. It's no more physical, right? And that act of able to have a digital signature need to go to the House of Lords to get passed, right? So people were waiting for 12 days to take care of the last rites of their family, right? Now that's changed, right? Now if something like that happens, they are well prepared that they will put a technology process tomorrow online in a particular day, right? Maybe 24 hours or 36 hours, right? So it has already made that evolution a bit more faster, and the governance has to cope up. It's no more governance follows actions. Its actions are happening, and the governance has to now cope up to make sure that whatever has happened is in the right balance. And that's exactly what I see in Singapore. And the government here in Singapore is actually far more agile, being a small country city. And those acts and amendments can be passed in 15 seconds if they want it. So from that perspective, I'll finish with a point that what Vishwa said, corporate governance is no more, it's very agile now.
I would want Vishwas to throw some more light on the organizations in the UK with respect to technology and with respect to this complete paradigm shift before moving on to another question that I have for you. But I would want you to specifically, just because he's mentioned about the UK thing, I would want you to throw some more light there.
I think if I'll take a broader view on this one. The CS world, the regulatory world is is a lot more established. It has its own ways of working. There are processes established and how things are happening. And then this regulated world is at the moment in collision with technological disruption. And we see it all over. When Google, again, I'm still giving you broad examples now. When Google wants to facilitate transactions, facilitate payments, when Facebook wants to do that, it wants to do that outside of a regulatory perimeter of corporate governance, isn't it? A bank has to go through multiple licensing processes, establish corporate governance before you start handling money. And Google and Facebook and payment service providers wants to shortcut that process because the technology disrupts existing infrastructure of corporate governance. So corporate governance, as Ajay said, needs to react to this massive change that's happening in the industry, in the society, and keep pace with it. And what we are seeing in board compositions because of that is that more and more technology-driven individuals are being asked to come over and join boards. So you have a chief technology officer, a CIO, a CDO sitting on the board, helping to make decisions and to react to external stimulus a lot more. And the challenge that comes then is, how do these different people who are coming from very different backgrounds talk in the same language? Because you're observing a board or you're part of a board and you start seeing this conflict between a 60-year-old experienced professional who understands the mechanics of the industry very well, but doesn't understand the technological disruption that's coming in. And the guy who's getting the technological angle in doesn't understand the framework in which that technology needs to work. So there's a huge amount of disruption debate on those fronts. When you do scenario analysis, I'll go back to it. When you do scenario analysis, you see this conflict coming up so often because the board members will say, "There's no way this thing will be disrupted. Our customers will be able to accept deposits. Why should that break down?" And the technology guys would say, "Because the API at the center in Ukraine is going to break down. That's why you can't accept deposits." And those two people don't understand what's going on, right? So technology is breaking down the way corporate governance is set up, and corporate governance is going to take time to react to it properly. But at least it's brought that diversity into the boardroom, where it's not just technologists reporting to board members, it's technologists sitting in the board and influencing decisions. It will lead to a lot of chaos. There will be a lot of problem that we'll see because of that. The word that we are not mentioning, ESG we've mentioned, diversity we've mentioned, we've not mentioned crypto yet. And crypto has the potential from a technology perspective to disrupt corporate governance completely. And it's happening as we speak, even if organizations are not taking crypto exposures at the moment. It's just because it's like the real estate crisis in the US. It drowned the whole world economy into crisis, right? There'll be one crypto event in Russia and things will start breaking down in India. And how do governance models react to that will be a case study to look at.
Well, that would be an interesting discussion, but let's not get into it at the moment. Just because you mentioned diversity and ESG, I have a question for you for that. Is there a mandate for ESG and diversity, equity, inclusion, and participatory governance in the UK by the regulatory authorities? Like we have one here. And how are otherwise, if there ain't, how are the organizations incorporating these in their business strategy?
There is significant guidance from regulators, particularly financial services regulators, about having more diversity in their boards. And it's a difficult challenge because there is an external marker of diversity, which is race, sexual orientation, minority ethnicity. That's an external marker of diversity. But then you're also looking for cognitive diversity, which is, are these people going to lead to a debate and a discussion which has a better outcome, rather than making the same discussion and not challenging each other enough? So, example, you can be a white male-dominated organization, and you get a white female into the organization. The female has had the same life history as every other male on that board. Is there enough cognitive diversity? Will they challenge the board effectively? So even though the regulators out here are mandating more diversity, it's listed out, it's articulated in the listing rules, it's articulated in voluntary standards. There's a way to go there. Firms are reacting to it, as all firms do in the first instance, by virtue signaling, by, again, going back to a compliance checklist and saying, regulators, you asked us to have more minority ethnic representation. Let's have more minority ethnic. We've hired two female directors, we've hired 2 black directors on our board. But it has to go forward from there, where these individuals, one, bring cognitive diversity to the board, and secondly, lead to better outcomes in terms of how the board is functioning. I'll throw in a challenge here as well. If I have a mandate in the UK to establish diversity in my board, I will define a metric which says X% of my board should be female, X% should be minority. I have a subsidiary which sits in India. That Indian subsidiary has only Indians, only Indians and males and females. Is that diverse? Is that board diverse? Or now I need to introduce 2 white people in that board for diversity? So there are those massive challenges we need to start working through if we need to get to a resolution on these questions. And it's complex. But the rule, so short answer, rules are there. Firms are expected to follow those rules. Compliance is slow because there's still a comply and explain at the bottom of it. If you can't do it, why not? And what steps are you taking? It's a multi-year transition that we are in at the moment.
Okay. Let's try and also understand it from another angle. What is the legal statutory framework in the UK for enhancing the board independence? And how independent is the board to ensure an effective corporate governance? Vishwas?
For all listed entities, obviously, board independence, majority independent shareholders, and the chairperson being non-executive are mandatory requirements. Unlike the US model, for example, where chairperson and CEO can be the same person, the UK doesn't allow that. Also, as I said, it has to be majority non-exec, and the non-execs must be sufficiently empowered to be able to override decisions in some instances, and provide effective challenge to what the executives are doing on a day-to-day basis. A lot of firms, through, as I said, the Walker Commission's requirements, apply these standards voluntarily. So even if they don't apply legalistically from a listing rule perspective and you're not listed, a lot of firms would apply them on a voluntary standard basis. What that has created as a challenge also is that the quantum of independent directors available that you can tap into is a small resource at the moment. So a lot of different firms are looking at the same talent pool when it comes to non-exec directors. So there is absolutely a need to broaden that skill set out. Having diversity on boards helps that, because you're not just looking at a narrow pool, but also looking at wider talent pools available. Did I answer your question, by the way? Sorry, you're mute.
Sorry. Yeah, you kind of did. We have another question coming in from the audience, and I would want to take it right away because it's specifically related. So it says, we're seeing a lot of regulatory movement in the UK for implementation of climate and generally ESG-related, sustainability-related governance requirements, gradually moving from comply or explain to forced compliance. But before implementation, the regulators, FCA and FRC, have a lot of interaction with the stakeholders and conduct webinars inviting corporates to participate and share their queries and concerns, which are answered live or subsequently. Do you think similar interaction in India will help in improving the level of governance across corporates in India? Okay, so basically the question has a lot of relevance they've picked it up from the UK and they're asking about the Indian context.
Bhavna, should I answer, or do you want to answer this one?
Go for it. I can add on.
From a rulemaking perspective, over the last 20 years, the UK has focused on what we call a consultative rulemaking process, which says if we are going to launch a new regulation, we need to do a cost-benefit analysis of that regulation, and we need to invite stakeholders who will be impacted by that regulation to respond and say how they will make it happen. Because I can bring out a set of rules now, but the industry is not geared up to respond to them. They can't comply with them because they've not thought about it. So there's a consultation process that need to go through. I'll go back to Ajay's point. It is dependent a lot on the societal context in which you behave, whether You think the market is mature enough to be in that process. The UK as a country which has had an unwritten constitution for 300 years now, it relies on a process of consultation, back and forth, discussing and debating before it comes somewhere. Some other parts of the world don't do that. Other parts of the world would say, this is the law, follow the law, and we'll see what we do with it. The UK model is great. It works well, but it's time consuming. That's why you don't get GPs in time, because you keep thinking about things and keep solving things before you get to an outcome. But it is the right model, in my view, for a mature market. I'll add one more example here. To aid in this process, I work with UK Finance, which is the industry body for regulated financial firms. And we sent a representation to the Treasury in the UK saying, you guys come up with so many laws. A lot of those laws are so difficult to implement in practice. You give us 1 year to implement them when they take 5. You need to think more about how you engage with us. Ask us questions. We'll tell you what we feel about it, and then you make a law about it. And this year, when the FSMA, the Financial Services Market Act, is being upgraded, the Treasury listened to that recommendation and said, we will set up a Treasury subcommittee, which will look at all regulatory proposals and say whether they are fit for purpose. And we'll do the cost benefit analysis. How much is it going to cost regulated firms to implement that new regulation if we come through with it? So it's again an example of a regulator listening to the market. Frankly speaking, my knowledge of the Indian market is limited at the moment, but I think that process, if it gets into India, will be bogged down by so much delay that things won't happen. So, Indian regulators, do what you need to do and then let people figure out what they need to do with it. So that's my view. Ajay is raising his hand.
Yeah. And Bhavna,
I agree with Vishwas. I think here it's a very consultative market, and, just the culture, not just externally, even internally in organization, just for our people there on India, people who are on this call, just for your information, even internally, it's a very consultative culture. And because it's a matured market, people are given enough voice to be listened to. And we've recently seen, and Vishwas, and probably everybody would know, what has happened in the political scenario here. U-turns have been done on the mini budgets, and that's because, the Prime Minister says, well, I've listened to people, so it is a very consultative culture here. But as Vishwas is saying, that takes a bit longer, for sure. But then that keeps people involved in it, right? People have a say in or an acceptance before it is implemented. So it has its own advantages and disadvantages. One is advantages, definitely people are ready for it. It's accepted, there is a mental acceptance to things and you prepare for it. But disadvantages is, it takes a long time. It takes some bit of time to get anything implemented. India market, the diversity of the landmass in India, the people, the culture, the organization structure. Again, I wouldn't like to comment, but we all know it. And the stage in which India is, it's still maturing. So, I would say, as Vishwas is saying, implement the law and go for it. May not be the right way, but that's how you would manage a bigger country like India. A different market.
Or maybe we could have like the best of both. Consultative, because we are maturing. We have to some extent,
which we have these industry bodies in India which are consulted and all. So there is definitely a representation. It's not that the government is making any laws by themselves. There is a representation and consultation process. But it's slightly different here in UK because I think we have to agree it's a mature market, right? It's a developed country. So it's in a different phase altogether as compared to India. So that kind of makes a difference.
Ajay, what do you want to add?
It's the same thing, but just want to add, I have been closely watching regulations in India, especially in the financial services industry. I'll just give a very specific example. Now, buy now, pay later, or loading the wallet, right? Which the UK was the first startup which in this space came from UK. For last 2.5 years, is still in a consultation and was supposed to come out in 2021. The regulation hasn't come out in 2022. It's still consultative. Right. Everybody in the world was hoping UK will show us the path and then we'll follow. Right. Now, who is showing us the path? India. Banned it outright. Okay. Now figure it out how to fix it. And was it right? Absolutely 100% right. Right. Because it's just taking too much risk in the system. Indian regulation comes with a lot of they will be always on the conservative side rather than making something. So they are 100% conservative. And when it comes with a bang. Obviously, now there's a consultation happening on how to ease it out, right? So I am a strong believer that next, whether it's in any industry, whether it's in regulation, I have been lucky to be an advisor to RBI in some of the parts. And I realized that even in the regulation, 5 years back, if you would ask me a statement, I would say FSA would follow, then MAS will come, and then APRA would come, and then India RBI will adopt it, right? I'm going to say reverse my stand. RBI will do, then FSA will follow now. It's going to change even the regulation, but it's India's word for next 15 years, be it regulation, be it corporate governance, be it making money.
Brilliantly put up. Okay. Well, I have a very specific question for Bhavna here. How is female leadership recognized in the UK? Since you are the only female in this panel today, I specifically wanted you to answer this question first. How is it recognized in the UK?
See, I mean, again, we spoke about it briefly just before this on diversity. So there is a shift in the mindset of bringing diversity and obviously bringing women on the leadership board in UK. Definitely, it's still kind of, it needs to be developed. It's the agenda is there. It's people mindset is moving towards it. The challenge is there, but it still needs to be progressed. It still needs to come to a status where, women are totally recognized on the board. The shift is happening. There is, but it needs more of a cultural and a structural change within the organization. There are certain regulations which are coming up that you need to have, maybe in future, like it's not now, but again, the consultation and processes are going on, that you should have at least an independent director who's a woman. You should have at least the chair or the CEO or CXO of the company should be a woman. So the shift is happening. But the culture has to be set up. The structure has to be set up accordingly. From the entry to the progress level, that system has to be there, that women are promoted at each level and given, equal weightage in the organization structure, which is very, very important. And somebody, again, I think it was Vishwas or Ajay, somebody touched upon it. The diversity it brings, the mindset it brings, it's a different perspective to things. We all say that women are, I'm sorry, no offense to men here on this, but women are better administrator, right? They can manage things much better than a male. No offense, there are exceptions everywhere. So those kind of cultural shift, those kind of, the change in the organization structure is needed, which is happening. There is a change. It will still take some time to move up to that level. But it has to start more at the bottom. You can have a top-down approach, like you bring in CEOs and CFOs at the, the top level, which will imbibe that culture from the bottom. At the same time, the organizations have to promote or, grow the women at the bottom level to the middle management and, move to the senior management. I kind of follow Indra Nooyi a bit because I really admire her leadership. And I really and I would like to quote her statement here. For a woman, it's such a thing that, her biological clock and her career clock normally moves at the same time. If you see what I mean, you are in a stage of growing a family as well as you're in a stage of growing your, jobs or your profession. So that really is I think hits a woman at times, in your mid-career and mid-age crisis, as we say, that we have both the responsibilities running at the same time. And how do we progress? But I believe, and comes from my personal experience, if you're ambitious, if you've got the right, attitude, that's most important. If you've got the right attitude, you can manage both. You can really manage both. You need a support system, but you manage both. So that's both ways, right? You need to have the right attitude. You need to have the right ambition and the drive to grow. And the organizations are supporting you if you are there, if you're ready for it.
Well, that's great. So how about Singapore, Nitish? How is that women leadership recognized in Singapore? Like in India, we have a mandate to have a woman director. So rightly said as Bhavna mentioned, that one has to have an attitude, and the ecosystem would definitely support, and it would be pretty welcoming in accepting this change. So how about Singapore?
Women I'm just adding, women have actually shown as well, we've seen so many, and in fact in India, the number of leaders running the banks in India is amazing. Most of them are run by women leaders. So that itself shows that you have the skill, you have the drive. It's just that you need to be more ambitious, and you need to believe in yourself that you can do it while bringing up a family as well. There's no stopping. There's no stopping there.
And the rest would just follow.
The rest would follow. You just need to have your own drive that you can do it, a belief in yourself that you can do it.
Okay. All right.
So from Singapore side, before we discuss this question, we need to understand Singapore is a very different country than India. So let's try to understand what Singapore is. It's a small city state of 6 million people, out of which 50% are foreigners. Who are working on some passes. So about 3 million local Singaporeans are there and permanent residents are there. And out of these 3 million, Singapore is a very diverse society. It's a mixture of Chinese, Malays, Indians, and other races. So it's like 40, 30, 20, 10, something like that. So it's by default, there is a diversity in the society. If you take a train, you go to a restaurant, you feel different people eating together, similar food and all those things. So with that thing in background, as per regulations, so there are two things: board independence and board diversity. Singapore do have rules for board independence. There must be same what Vishwas was saying, must be CEO and chairman should be separate. There is an NCB nominating committee that guides the board on how to put up the rules. There is also about majority of directors should be independent if chairman is not independent, and there should be majority of non-executive directors. All rules are there. So Singapore has regulatory framework for board independence, but in terms of board diversity, there are no rules at all. It's left to the organizations. Reason being, it's already diverse enough. Women in Singapore are definitely as good as men in all aspects of society, in work. Most of women are working. And if you, as a matter of observation, I think Jay will agree. If you go to CBD, that's our central business district, you will see more women than men. So there are two aspects. One is that we don't need it, probably because women are very, very empowered. Women are very strong, very independent. Women's Saturday is very independent also in Singapore. So women have a lot of rights, a lot of opportunities, very good education, and they do not need regulatory support to be recognized in terms of representation to the board. That's one part. But in terms of diversity, as we said, also again about races, about different, there's no such rule, and but still we see a lot of diverse boards, especially in terms of listed companies and all. So I would say Singapore is very well placed because of society. So we have not put a ladder of or put a support of a regulation to have a diverse board, but it's the culture, it's the people, it's the way of living. Diversity is a way of living in Singapore. So in that way, a legal protection may not be required, but we do not have any women cannot. There's no glass ceiling kind of thing. You can see women everywhere.
Wow. I think that's because of the fact that comparatively it's a new economy and yet developed. So it's already has got diverse culture and it already has things in mandate. Brilliant. So I have a question for you on leadership then. So to my understanding, leadership in governance is more on motivation and inspiration, and leadership in risk management is the capability of firefighting and out of the box thinking. So are they not opposite approaches? And I would also want the others to share their thoughts on this one after Nitish.
Well, this is yes and no. Answer is yes and no. Because if you talk about motivation and inspiration, it's always there, whether it is risk approach or it's the governance approach. Because if your leadership is not giving you inspiration enough to have policies, to have your everything in place, there is no way you will grow. And similarly, if you talk about inspiration of out-of-box thinking, in governance, what gives you is a basic rule where what you have to, the regulations give you what you have to follow. But it doesn't stop you from going beyond that. You can always be creative. You can always be imaginative to come up with something else that's even better for our stakeholders, even better for our society. Society, even businesses do things voluntarily. So the creativity aspect of your governance, out-of-box thinking is always there even in governance. You can always do more than what you are required to do by law or by regulations or by your mandate given by your local authorities, by regulations. Similarly, in governance also, we have this inspiration, you have to be a role model. So how do you expect your team to be compliant with the risk measures or a risk assessment if the leader itself is not showing you that motivation, not showing you that leading by example attitude? So answer is yes and no. It's as we were talking about, nothing in business is this part, but it's all mixed. So when we talk about risk approach, they can always teach governance part how to think out of box, how to come up with new solutions to go beyond what is written in the laws or in the guidebooks. And similarly, when we talk about risk management, the leadership has to inspire them by actions, by leading by example, by showing them they do it, they follow it, not just in terms of checklists, but in terms of spirit, in terms of what needs to be done, irrespective of what's written. So it's a mix.
I think we did discuss this, like during this 1 hour discussion, we've kind of touched base at some areas that when the risk comes in, we just have to react. And then there are policies and legal frameworks in place. And sometimes we have to, like the pandemic hit, and then there has to be rules that had to be changed. So any other thoughts on this from any one of you, Vishwas or Ajay?
Just to add, just to pick on the last point with Nitish, had a very fair point about learning from each other and being on the both sides, what I've seen, right? And what's happening in the current environment. Everybody who's in the corporate governance is looking how to measure the effectiveness. About how do you see the report, how do you see whether we are effective. They're talking about dashboarding, they're talking about reporting, right? And that's where the stretch is. While in the risk management side, it was always more quantitative in nature, and the questions are more about quality, right? Whether the models are right. So the shift is that the risk management frameworks are shifting and may adopt some qualitative oversight, which can come from the typical risk governance, the corporate governance framework. Whereas the corporate governance framework can pick up some modeling and methodology to measure and manage, get more quantitative in nature. So there's obviously this synergy. I don't know. It was not the precise answer to the question whether which one is right or wrong, but obviously they both have to exist. But I think that's the learning, and that's where I see. I've recently started doing a PhD, and I know a lot of people only talking about how to create a scale for risk sustainability, how to measure the sustainability, effectiveness of corporate governance, effective of having ESG framework, effectiveness of CSR. So it's all measuring. Everybody's talking about measuring. And in risk, we always only measured. So now we are looking at on the qualitative side. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and I think that's very well said by both Nitish and Ajay. It's become more of a qualitative and quantitative, risk management, corporate governance kind of a framework. So it's not really about firefighting at the end if you are prepared for it. It shouldn't become a struggle. When we say firefighting, is more like how COVID hit us and we were all running like headless chickens everywhere. So it is, those examples have or those incidences have helped us to build more quantitative, analysis around our risk framework and be more prepared for it. Things can come, new risk or new emerging risk can come, that's fine. But the corporate governance is becoming more agile or more resilient to kind of putting that into their framework now. So that can help them meet, any other risk which is coming, unexpectedly if something comes up. So that mind frame is changing now in corporate governance now, rather than just keeping it like a last minute. If something comes up, we'll see. Not really. I think the boards are becoming more and more prepared for new risks which are coming, can come in, basically.
And also a little more accepting of the change, anticipating. So like an analysis and would be able to accept the changes that would be coming in and be able to incorporate or percolate that down the line.
Yeah, I think that's what we've been discussing. A lot of, scenarios are built in now, as I said, from my experience being in finance side, when we give these numbers to the board, we build in a lot of scenarios. We go to the worst scenario, like, the worst situation which can happen. We can reach our profits to any wild example of 10% or something, taking it down. So we try and now build in all these scenarios in our risk management framework or corporate governance when we give these numbers to the board, just to be ready for any contingencies in the future. And, if things happen, then we are kind of prepared for it to some extent. We can fight for it basically at that time.
Vishwas, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think one more thing to just add is the shift in attitude has, over the last 20, 35 years or something, has come from saying risk is bad to the fact that risk will occur. Things will go wrong. And we need to be in a position to manage when things go wrong, rather than let's control the risk. Let's get the numbers in. Let's see what the numbers say. It's the false precision of numbers which got the 2000 crisis to us. It's the false precision of models which got the 2008 crisis to us. We believed what the models told us was the truth of reality. And reality was not what the models were telling us, because the models were based on imperfect information. In my mind, the most recent example of managing a crisis situation is the funeral of the Queen. The fact that the plans for managing the funeral of the Queen were set 30 years back. If the Queen dies, this is the order in which things will need to happen. This is the first phone call. This is what happens when she dies in Scotland. This is when she dies in England. What the process will be, how will things be managed, who will call whom, how will 500,000 army persons be getting into the city and managing it's going to happen, and you manage to it rather than assuming it will not happen. The first time I moved to the UK, talked to my financial advisor, and the thing he said to me was, whatever my age at that point in time is, have you thought of a funeral plan? I'm in my 30s. Why are you asking me for a funeral plan? But you need to plan for these things. You don't want to die and not have anything to do with it, right? Because you are going to die. So it's that consciousness that it's not about controlling the risk. It's about managing the fallout of a risk that's happening. And that's just shifted over the last 20 years, particularly after the pandemic. And that's where the qualitative, quantitative, things start coming in. Don't rely on numbers. Do more than that.
Brilliant example taken, brilliantly answered. Okay, while we're doing this risk analysis and risk management, Nitish, another question for you. Let's say while doing diligence of compliance, suddenly a person comes to know, just because you've been a company secretary all throughout, this is a question specifically for you, that suddenly a person comes to know that there has been non-compliance in the past. How would you recommend dealing with such a situation?
So you have to, once we see a non-compliance, because I'm a part of a lot of diligence, receiver side and doer side also, because of the startups going through the round of financing and all. So first thing you need to see that is there a suspicious transaction? Are you supposed to report to the regulator or not? First thing you have to see, because of the regulation in Singapore, we are supposed to file a STR, suspicious transaction report, to the authorities if we feel that there's a foul play, there's some money laundering going on, some AML rules are followed or not. That's the first thing you have to check. The moment you see suspicious transaction, you're supposed to report it. First thing is to report it, whether or not, there's no client confidentiality and all those things, because this is a duty before your duty to the client. So first thing you check, is something suspicious that needs to be reported to the authorities for money laundering or terrorist financing or whatever is there. After that, you see whether this compliance was done on intention or it was done by a mistake. If it is intentional, again, you have to report it to the management, to the party you are going to, this is the intentional one, and this has been done by mistake. If you cannot recognize, you still go to the people and ask and try to find out why this error has occurred, why this non-compliance has occurred. After that, what you see is that, is it rectifiable or not? So if it is rectifiable, you go to the relevant party, tell them, go and rectify, this is the way, do some filings for this needs to be done, or get a ratification done from the board or whatever it is. So there are three approaches. First is that whether to report it or not. Second, whether it is intentional or not. And third, whether it is rectifiable or not. The most difficult part of knowing, of course, we will know that this part needs to be reported. There's a rules, you can check it. We will know that this part can be rectified, we know. What we don't know is whether it's intentional or not. So this is always the tricky part, determine whether this non-compliance has been done intentionally or not intentionally. That is where most of our time will take, because first case, we know what to do. Third case, we know what to do. Second case, then we figure out, then we will see what is the level of non-compliance and what is our purpose of our due diligence. I mean, of course, if you are a company secretary, you have to make sure the company is compliant. But if you are just doing compliance on behalf of a client, how does it affect your client? How does it affect your report? So, and then you decide how will you mention in your report. It has to be in footnotes or somewhere on an Excel, or you just put it over email. So non-compliance, of course, it should never be given an oversight. You have to do something about it. It depends what is the purpose of due diligence. If you are a company secretary, if you are the company, you must make sure it's been rectified either this way or that way. If not, at least take note of it that this was discovered at this time, and put it in the writing that this has been done, and there's no way out of it. I mean, you cannot do something about it. The person has died, you cannot get a signature or something like that. So non-compliance always should be taken very seriously. It should always be rectified to the best possible way out, whatever is there. And third part is that you should always make sure that this is not repeated. So how do you tell the board or tell the executives that this is what happened and this is what we had, this non-compliance, and then you find out this was the reason. Sometimes you can pinpoint, sometimes you cannot pinpoint, but you can always come up with strategy or plans or some sort of checklist to make sure it is not repeated in the future. So the purpose of finding non-compliance is also to stop it from happening again. Otherwise, there's no point of finding it, and you go after 1 year, there's another same non-compliance is there. So out of these three steps, three things to do, and fourth one is not repeating. Two are very important: not repeating and finding out the reason why it happened. Remaining two is very straightforward. You know, this is how to rectify it. You know, this is to be reported to authorities. And then I would like to add on one more thing is that when you report to authorities in Singapore, it's completely confidential. Your name is like a whistleblower. They will not release your name to anybody. So you have to report it to authorities, whether you report to client or not. That's a problem, because it's already been, because if you report to authorities, you're not supposed to inform client, it will amount to tipping off. So let them investigate. So you have to see on the case-to-case basis whether it will amount to tipping off or not. You see $1 million came in one day, went next day, for example. So if you inform client, he might go and rectify papers and documentation backdate or something like that. So there are specific rules about tipping off. So you have to be very careful in that step when you report to the authorities that you are not tipping them off. Otherwise, you will also be charged for tipping off, and there's a severe penalty for that.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is, even if we are able to rectify, and let's say if it was a non-intentional non-compliance, it's still that we have to report to the authorities. Ideally, that's what we should be doing.
So reporting is mostly for suspected money laundering transactions, suspected trade financing transaction. So yes, if it is suspected, it is one of the indicators of money laundering, you have to report it, even if you rectify.
Okay. Ajay, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just this question which you asked and Nitish clarified. It's not for everything. It's obviously when you see there's a fraudulent activity which is going on. And then Singapore, the rule is always right? You always be on the right side of the law if you want to do business here. The second thing which is very clear is that, which Nitish would know more than me, is that for almost everything which was non-compliant, which are not creating a financial loss or are not breaking laws, it's most of act of omission. There are always ways to rectify and pay the penalties and file it right. Especially people like me who might advise and I forget to file my own return at time, then obviously you need to pay the penalty, right? And then there's also a process of asking for a waiver, that bhool ho gayi, sorry, give me back my money. And 9 out of 10 times they will give you back your money because, okay, they realize that you made a mistake, right? But yes, so not in my side, just to add, working for a lot of startups and a lot of businesses, there are plenty of examples of non-compliance, but they are not in the nature of what Nitish said, that where there's a money laundering or a fraudulent financial transaction which has happened. And then if it's that detected, then God save you.
And just to add on, in Singapore, if you want to rectify something with the regulators, it's very easy. They are not as stringent as India that you have to file this and do this and get this approval. It's very easy. You speak to them and they will just, sometimes they will even change the law. I have encountered. They will just change in next rectification. So yeah, they did. They did for, we went to, oh, this is something that we have done. So they say, it was for Reliance. Oh, the Reliance. Okay, yeah, the Reliance. Okay. We are working on this new regulations, and it will be done in X number of months, and maybe just wait for a while. Because before that, we would have to go for a court order to rectify that. But they amended the regulation that even the registrar can change it. So they give them authority to expunge the whole thing. So yeah, I mean, they are very cooperative. Authorities are very cooperative, very fast, and yeah, it's easy to rectify things in Singapore.
Brilliant. How about the UK?
I think transparency, sorry, my voice is going. Transparency is quite important. We had a recent case where we discovered capital calculations for a bank were not working correctly. They had already reported that for the last 6 months to the regulators and to the markets. And I got a call from the CEO saying, what is my position here? What should I be doing here? Because there is an issue. It's a decision that we need to make about materiality, and the materiality will determine whether this is to be reported or not. And my advice in that case was, the matter is not about materiality anymore. It's about a fundamental way calculations happen. And my advice would be to call up the regulator and tell them that there's a mistake and what you're going to do about it. And the CEO, we helped the CEO prepare the conversation points with the regulator. They called this PRA up, the Prudential Regulation Authority. And the PRA were extremely, as Nitish said, PRA were extremely supportive about it. They said, yes, we know mistakes happen. Thank you for confessing that the mistake has happened. You said that it has happened under your watch. Good. And you've set out a plan how you're going to fix it. Keep us informed about what the materiality is going to be in the future and how you're going to fix it. But that builds trust in who you are as an individual and a firm, and that you're taking the right decisions. Secondly, under the UK law for banking firms or financial services firms, there's what we call a senior managers regime. Under the regime, you are certified to hold a particular function, the CEO, the chief risk officer, the chief compliance officer, and so on. And you have a duty towards the financial sector and the regulator, which is not legalistic entirely, but there's a duty to do duty to not cause harm, if I may say so. And if things go wrong, you show that you have taken reasonable steps. There's a definition of the term reasonable steps to protect both the firm and the financial system. So things went wrong, fine, but you took reasonable steps after that to fix the problem. I'm happy with you. I can work with you. If you did not do that, I have a problem with you. So it's a cooperative model, I would say.
Well, I think to precisely put it, it's a complete ecosystem where if we're talking about transparency, we have to be transparent ourselves, right? At the stage when we come across things which were not really the way they were supposed to be done. So, yeah, we just have about 8 minutes before we wrap up. I am willing to take some audience questions. I have a few here, and if the audience is willing to ask, and if time permits, we'll take more. So there's one particular question which says, what are the prime factors to consider in developing a dashboard for corporate governance in a startup? Ajay, would you want to take that?
Sure. So, long and short, there's no one thing which you would like to report to, right? So there are obviously quite a few parameters which goes into dashboard. I think the first thing is clearly identifying what is relevant for you and your stakeholders, from your financial performance, your matrices, and also from your corporate governance matrices, right? Whether this is number of board meetings which have happened, how many people attended, the simple ones which we normally have, right? Even in our annual reports, right? If that is what is something which is supposed to be reported. So who we are reporting? We are reporting mostly to the investors, right? Primarily. So it's a very open discussion. Many times it's driven by the VCs or the large investors, that what are exactly you're looking for. The first part is really identifying and not having too many and too little, right? If there are too many matrices to measure and report to, then the effectiveness reduces. So you have to identify and not agree for every matrices or to be incorporated. There has to be a reason what decisions will be driven out of that. And the second thing is about the collection of the data. It's fairly easy when it comes to a startup because the data set is fairly small and a lot of those will be entered. But the way the data has been in a larger organization, what is more important in the corporate governance is the lineage, where the data came from and the source of the data. So because that's the secondary part of the truth, which is fairly easy to establish in a startup, right? So that's what is the way is the source of data, who's supposed to enter it, and you have the governance framework. And the third thing is, which is clear, because again, you don't have to use robust technologies. And even Excel is very good for dashboard reporting for a startup, or you can use some very simple tools that the data cannot be tampered with. As long as you have taken care of these three things: source of data, not ability for others to tamper the data, and having the right matrices, you should be good to go. And in my view, not more than 10 to 12 parameters needs to be reported.
I think that question has come in because the entire startup ecosystem, startup and MSME ecosystem is booming, has actually gone so up. And in fact, the institute has also set up a startup and MSME catalyst, whereby the company secretaries would be able to, help startups set up the entire governance framework. So I think that's where the question is coming in from.
I'll just add one thing to that part, and that's something which might be good for the practice as a whole, right? So in Singapore, I don't know what's in Singapore, and Nitish knows it 10 times more than me because he does it every day. Whenever a new business comes in, there are specific grants available by the government to establish things, right? To establish HR policies, to establish and even for automation, right? Even for hiring people who are more than 65, right? That's the way they incentivize, instead of giving any other rebate to startups, to put these governance framework in practice. And then they are authorized companies which are specializing in this, puts those governance framework in place, proves to the government that yes, it has been done, it's in practice, then they get the money. So there is this the process itself in the startup world, right? Even then, I know there are a lot of breaches, because a lot of breaches are more from financial services reporting. I know quite a few startups myself who have raised millions of dollars, even from Tata's, right? But they have not even filed their financial statement for last 5 years, right, in Singapore, right? So there are breaches. But so that's where the investor would come in, right, as what's important for them, what is supposed to be measured. In startup world, the last thing, again, and I know I'm talking too much here, is that there are a lot of things which happens on the fly, and the flexibility and the freedom for founders to do this, because they have just arrived in their world, and that sudden governance things kind of stifles them, right, which was not there, right? So there has to be a very, very clear balance. I have done very few. Nitish, if you want to add something on that, otherwise we can move on to the next question.
For startup, what I will say is that, rightly pointed by Ajay, that most of these founders are either fresh grads, most of the cases, or they do not have enough understanding or experience about corporate governance and all those things. So that's where company secretaries can come really handy. Especially with all these startups, they need to do things right from day one. Otherwise, when time comes for funding, they will have issues. They will have unnecessary delays. So that's where probably institute should have something, maybe some module or something whereby they prepare the profession for these kind of new business models. We have been there since 1983 or something, but we are not doing any special module, at least a chapter on startups. So there should be something that should be teaching students about how to manage startups, probably. Yeah, that's what I like to add.
In simple word, yahan paisa hai.
Exactly. For everyone. It's for everyone, not for us, not for
I'm
glad
members. To inform you all that the institute has actually taken that advice, and it has already prepared. Is changing the syllabus. So next year onwards, we've got a new syllabus coming out, and it would incorporate all these new changes. with the ease of doing business happening in the country and the governance, government talking about more of governance and less of government, I think it is the time now that we incorporate this new study into our syllabus. And yes, the Institute is doing it. I have a question now for, I think if Bhavna would want to answer that. Few important areas where governance professionals should concentrate so that it is directly measurable in terms of money.
I think it's important to, and then again, just following up from the previous question is, you need to categorize your risk. So that's an important area where people should be concentrating on, like medium, high, and low risk, and then put in your, I don't know if that's the question which is coming up, but, categorize them and put your concentration on, or your money on the high risk areas, somebody is asking, or on the medium risk, and then the low risk, and especially for startups or any organization. And that should be what the corporate governance should be looking at, the high risk area where they can concentrate, invest. Putting money is like, they can invest in overcoming those risks or mitigate. You can never overcome risk. We all know that in any part of, corporate governance. So mitigating that risk to the minimum where we can, having a plan around it. So that's where, categorization of risk is important, and putting your money in onto the high risk areas. I'm just conscious of the time. We can go on, but
Agree. I have another question, but I'm so sorry. We just have about a minute. The question was, what measures should be taken for upcoming global recession in 2023? I am not really sure if anyone would want to answer this question. We're not really looking forward to a recession. And the entire discussion where we've talked about analyzing the risk and preparing yourself for situation, because rightly said so that it will happen. It is just that we have to prepare ourselves and have resilient, in the entire structure should be resilient and robust enough to be able to withstand that and mitigate all of it. And I'm sure that's what each one of you all would want to add, just like a closing remark.
Not have a concentration risk, as we said, is important. So as you're rightly saying, have plans in place to mitigate our risk to the minimum we can. So, concentrate on your high risk. Make sure that you don't have this concentration or, those kind of risks around. And you have your business continuity planning. As Vishwas said, the models may or may not work, but still you need to put in a business continuity plans. You need to put in numbers around there to make sure that you are ready, prepared for it, because that's what COVID or, all these crises told us, that the board was not even prepared for these risks to come and forget about, how to deal with them. Another example was Queen's funeral, they were preparing for it for so long. So it's important as a corporate governance is to be prepared for the future, go back to your future planning very well so that you have your models working around it. Things will happen, things which are out of our control. We can't do much about it. Nobody knew about COVID that would come. But at least the 21% or 20% of the organizations which were prepared for new risks to come in could at least manage it or mitigate it to an extent. So that's very important part of our role, and which is what, as a company secretary, I would just sum up as a company secretary, a hardcore company secretary on the board needs to make the board of directors aware of this. That needs to be brought out in every board meeting's agenda as a top priority, that the risk management should be robust. We should have a plan around it. And then let's see, I hope for no more recessions. We had enough. We are all in our career where we want to progress and not face another recession.
Absolutely. On that positive note, would Ajay and Nitish just add a closing remark or something just to sum up the entire discussion?
Keep your money in your pocket.
And stick to basics. Keep compliant. That's it. Keep doing compliances. That's it. It's a big word. Yeah, be compliant. Stick to the basics.
Compliant. Brilliant. It was a wonderful discussion, and I just got to know Vishwas had to leave for some prior engagement. So thank you so much, all the panelists, for such an insightful and engaging discussion. I have really had a very good time listening to all of you all, and such wonderful thoughts, such wonderful insights coming in. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. The Institute really is very, very grateful to you all for taking out so much time and enlightening all our members across the globe. And it was a pleasure having you all here. Great.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Have a lovely
Thank you for
weekend.
organizing, and thank you to the Institute. We feel,
Have a lovely
I feel
weekend.
now proud of being part of this institute, though I don't use it. But
That's what the intention was, to make you all feel proud of the Institute at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you.
Lovely.
Thank
Have
you.
a nice weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.